We've all experienced the profound and emotionally connected moments that music can create. When included in virtual reality, it just doesn't add to the experience. Audio becomes an immersion multiplier. I'm Tom Smurden. I'm going to show you how to get the most out of your music in VR. Michael Bross will then come up and discuss his intent as a composer when developing music for VR. He will also be going over some integration examples. And then Jonathan Mayer will show you his recording techniques for spatialized music. Spatialized music creates the feeling that you're in the experience as opposed to just watching the experience. And that's what this is all about, being immersed, feeling like you're there. This talk is going to show you how we did this in first steps. And another thing I want to go over is, like, why is it important? I was just out to dinner with a couple of devs while we were here, and this was super interesting. And they're just like, you're just talking about more stuff for VR. It's going to be a neat thing, and it's like, this is a gimmick, and it's totally not a gimmick. The main reason for this is so you can get a good mix. When you just have stereo music in your headphones, it kind of detracts from that feeling of immersion. So if I'm in a movie theater and I'm watching like this great movie, and when the score comes up underneath it and it gives you that emotion like of action, of excitement, of sadness, whatever the score is there to do, if you just have stereo music in your headphones, you know what? You don't hear that world anymore, and it just kind of pulls you out because it's stuck to your ears. So let's say you're walking down a street, and it's a city street, and then you hear a car driving by over here, you hear a car driving by back here, car up here, people talking this way, and that's all good. That's all been sound design, and it feels cool. But then in real life, if you do that and then you put headphones on, immediately you're in your own inner world. The mix is not externalized anymore. You're hearing just music in your ears, and you're trying to get away from that feeling of being on the city street. That's the exact opposite of what we're trying to do in VR. What we want to do is put the music in the world with you. But we don't want to feel like there's we're not talking like very much, like not diegetic music where there's a emitter over here, like there's violins playing from over here. I'll walk up next to it. And then all of a sudden it's like, why are violins coming from this spot right here? That doesn't make any sense. We do a few different techniques to make the music in the world, but not give you that phantom source problem. And we want to make sure the music is externalized as well. And that means it's not in your head. You don't want anything to feel like it's in your head. You want everything to feel like it's in the world around you. So there's a couple different ways we do this right now. There's quad mixing. That's what we'll take a quad mix of the music. And it's not like you're creating a music mix for a movie or a TV show, because all that is based on your front, left, and right speakers. And then in your surrounds, you're adding like just some reverb or some filler in there because your focus is always in front of you. In VR, you don't know where the focus is going to be for each experience. So you need to be able to turn and look around, and the music still has to sound good any direction you are. So when you're mixing, you want to do a quad mix, but without a front to the mix. You want it to sound good every direction. Bross is going to go over more of that later on. We did this, and we used point source emitters, and we call this the compass system. There's an emitter at the north, west, east, and south. And that's world relative. That's not head relative. When you turn your head, it's not going with you. If there's an emitter right here playing part of that music, it's always to the north. You can turn your head, walk around, whatever, and it's always going to be like 10 feet away from you. So you can walk, that point stays that far away from you all the time. All 4 points stay the same distance away from you, so you don't get closer to them. And it kind of lets you mix. You can turn the music actually up louder than you can with just stereo music, and it doesn't kill the entire mix. You can get that really good underscore feeling. The other way to do this is using ambisonics. Now, this is a little easier to use. It's easier to put in game. You could have music emitters all around you, above you, below you, behind you, and it's still only going to take 4 streaming tracks. And then using any of our tools, or actually any of the spatialization tools that are out there, you can put ambisonics on the player, and they just follow them around, and those are always going to be world relative and not head relative. Now, the drawback to ambisonics is that when you have a point here playing something in your mix, it kind of smears a little bit, especially first-order ambisonics. So that's good for pads and strings and other things like that. It works pretty well, and it's super easy to hook up. I mean, if you're doing that and you just don't want to build a system like the compass point system, ambisonics is a super easy way to go, and it still sounds pretty good. Both of these systems are better than headlock stereo music. And now Michael's going to come up and show you his work in first steps.
Okay. Thanks. Hi, I'm Michael Bross, and I'm going to talk about some of the music that I created for the Oculus Quest First Steps experience, and to give you insight into the process of creating and mixing music for VR. So what is First Steps? It's a VR experience designed to be the doorway to the Oculus Quest. It's a short set of showcases that allow users to get comfortable with the capabilities of the headset and hand controllers. Now, as part of it, an Oculus logo introduction, or what we called internally the wow moment, kicks off the experience. And the idea of calling it the wow moment was because we were looking to create something really inspiring and engrossing and absorbing for the user in the first 60 seconds. Now, while this is, I can't show you this in VR, obviously. This will give you an idea of what the experience is. Thanks. This was a really interesting part of the project to work on. When marrying visuals and music together, usually what happens is that visuals are created first, and then that informs the shape of the music. But we decided to do it differently, where we decided to create the music first, and then that would push the shape of the visuals. I began by creating a first pass, what we call a mock-up with sample orchestral instruments, because we were looking to use live orchestra because it has a really emotional and powerful sound. So once I created my first pass, I handed it off to the artists, the visual art team, who spent about a month doing their first pass. And then once they were done with the first pass, it came back to me, and then we had more of a collaborative process where it was a lot more iterative, a lot more back and forth, working on timing and other elements. So from there, once we got to a place where we were pretty happy with the music, I began to prep it for the live recording session. And as you can see, these are the stems I delivered, broken out, strings, brass, other instruments, and most of this stuff was replaced. And once I had that ready, I handed it off to Jonathan Mayer's team, and Jonathan is going to talk about the recording process and mixing.
Hi, I'm Jonathan. And as Michael mentioned, I had the privilege of producing the recording and the mixing of the live orchestra for the First Steps piece. I'm going to walk you through that whole process from where Michael left off. Now, if you're used to producing and recording live orchestral music, a lot of this will sound the same, but I'm going to focus on some details also that are specific to making music for immersive media and how we work that into the process. So Michael reached out to me, and he knew that we were planning a live recording session in Nashville with about a 60-piece orchestra. We recorded at Ocean Way Studios. And so the first step at that point was to take Michael's mock-up, as he mentioned, and make sure that we got his intent on paper. So this involves working with an orchestrator. And to do that, we had to take sort of a version of the stems that Michael showed you, along with all his MIDI data and forward that along to the orchestrator. And their job is to make all the sheet music and make sure all the individual parts for the players are on the right stands and all the work that goes into that. In addition to that, we also have to prepare a separate set of audio assets for the recording session itself. So a lot of work just happens in this phase, making sure that we have everything we need. The stems that you need for such a recording session are a little bit different, and you need to do things like print a click track, and all of that keeps the session flowing at a good pace. We're recording a lot of pieces of music at once, and so we can't have a situation where the engineer in the recording session has to tinker with the files to get the playback right in the room or anything that the orchestra needs. We can't have any setup time. So all this is pre-production work. Now, a live orchestra always sounds best when everybody plays together. And if you're recording that, being able to listen and blend all the elements as you like before you get your final take. Because of the mixing formats that Michael and Tom talked about, we wanted to have more control over the individual pieces of the orchestra. So we actually wind up splitting them up quite a bit with a lot of granularity. But we keep them together as much as possible. So they're all in the room together. And that way we can focus on the blend, we can rehearse the piece, we can work out all the kinks if there are any. And then when we're ready to start recording, we might just record the high strings, or we might just record part of the woodwind section. We also like to split up rhythmic elements from the more melodic and lyrical elements of the piece. And this gives us a lot of ability to do different things, not only spatially, but just how we treat them in the mix, sonically. Now, none of what I've said is particularly unusual. Film and television and other types of video games do this for mixing and editing purposes. I mean, nowadays, with digital editing for picture, it's pretty rare that anyone who composes to picture gets a locked picture before they have to finish their music. So a lot of this music is recorded granularly for any type of media. But with immersive media, we get a lot more granular, especially because we want to create that feeling that you're inside the space. In addition to that, we find that these approaches to recording really future-proof the work we do, too. So I've had a lot of experiences over the years where we'll do a product like this, and then a few years later, the experience will get ported to some other product that we didn't even know about at the time. And so the more granular and the more ability to control your assets that you have when you go back to them, the better off you are. But the really important takeaway here when we talk about recording is that something magical, I think, happens. I know it sounds a little cheesy, but when you get a piece of music like Michael wrote, and then you bring that to life through the breath and movement of 60 human beings, something changes, and you get something a little different. And when we're talking about immersing you in a product, I think that kind of magic can really push things over the line. Here's a quick clip that just highlights all the detail that you get out of a bunch of players like this. I just realized I'm wearing the same shirt that I was wearing at that recording session right now. I have more than one shirt. Okay, so as you can see, that video is cut together to make it look like everybody was playing together, by the way, but we did record them in pieces. So when we get to mixing, Tom mentioned this before, but this is where we really start to deviate from traditional formats. Even with what we call immersive mixing formats for film and television, we're still working in a planar medium, right? Like the picture's a flat thing in front of you in all those situations. Even if it's a 3D movie, you're still sort of outside the space looking in. But what we're trying to do is more deliberately spread the sounds around. So even when you mix and surround formats for those kind of pictured mediums, you're pretty conservative generally. Like, you don't want someone in a movie theater distracted by something behind them in the mix. But for us to attain the kind of immersion we're talking about, we really pushed the envelope, and Michael really encouraged us to move things around and put the listener right there inside the mix. And then lastly, we had to work really closely with Michael on how we delivered those assets. So we get a nice quad mix, but we still have to deliver it in a format that works for him. And that's a great segue to have Michael come back and talk to you about how he implemented these assets.
So once Jonathan's team finished mixing, the quad mix was implemented by the sound design team. Tools used in general for first steps, Unreal Engine was used to create the whole overall experience, and then specifically for audio, Wise was used. For those of you who don't know, that's basically a game-oriented, real-time sound design tool and engine. So 2 points I want to make related to approach. First of all, this music was placed in the environment itself. It wasn't placed outside the environment like you might do with 2D. We placed it in the environment. Since the quad mix had 4 separate channels, like Tom was talking about, we kind of took this approach with more like a compass system where it was 1, 2, 3, 4. And then from that, the music was not headlocked to the user, but instead locked to the virtual space, which means as the user turned their head, they would hear different elements of the mix as if they were standing in the middle of the orchestra. So now, in our next example, we had other challenges and a different style of music. In dance, we wanted the music to sound like it was placed in a music club. So we decided to use ambisonic format for this. To give you an overview, dance is an experience that takes the user into a virtual music club setting and teaches them how to use the Quest controllers by dancing with a robot named Monty. The beauty of the Quest is that because there are no cables attached to the headset, it gives the user a lot more freedom of movement. For the overall dance experience itself, the approach was to create something really fun and upbeat and a little flashy and kind of disco-inspired. So I set out from a musical perspective to do the same thing. That was that, and also to create a track that was catchy. Let's check out a bit of it with this video. Thank you. I spent about a week, a little more, sketching out this track, and my final was actually not too far off from that first pass. Again, I composed and produced the track with Logic, but unlike the Quest intro, where I had Jonathan's help and the help of his fantastic team, I actually mixed it myself and produced all of it myself. So I exported all the tracks and actually imported all my stems into Nuendo, where I did the mix, because Nuendo has great functionality related to mixing in the headset itself. Our target format was first-order ambisonics. While the Quest is a powerful device, we we still need to stay within a processing budget. So we decided on first order format, which is a lower channel count, but was still pretty acceptable for what we were trying to do. Now, unlike mixing for 2 speakers or in stereo, ambisonic allows us to take all directions into account and place music not just in a horizontal space or vertical space, but also based on distance. So we can basically take a sound and put it anywhere around us at a point in space. By the time I had mixed for this project, I had already mixed in ambisonic format on a number of previous projects, so I was pretty, I had a pretty good idea on what the mix process would be. And so I want to cover 5 points related to this particular part of the project. First, most Logic tracks I exported as stereo files, but then I folded them down as into one point in the ambisonic mix. Vertical mixing. When I mixed, I kept instruments more or less at ear level or a little above, and this approach worked really well when married together with the sound design. Lower frequencies. It was better generally to keep instruments like bass and kick drum in the middle of the mix, otherwise it felt unbalanced. Like we did with the intro that we talked about previously, the music was spatialized and non-headlocked. And last, because the user moved around a fair amount, I did not do any automated panning in the mix. All of these techniques were combined to create the most immersive sound approach to the venue that we were creating, in this case, for the dance experience in First Steps.
So as you can see, it takes a village to do what might seem on the surface like a pretty straightforward immersive music experience. It takes a team. There's a lot of detail that goes into getting this right.
And what separates VR from traditional media is the feeling that you're actually there. Spatializing your music makes you feel like you're in the world, living in that moment. You're not a bystander, you're there, and spatialized music intensifies that feeling. Try out the wow moment, Dance with Bonnie. These are all available on Quest. If you have one, it automatically loads when you first start, so you should have all that right there in First Steps. And also, to make any of this content, you can use our free audio tools. You can check out the Facebook 360 workstation for building your ambisonics, and you can also use the Oculus Audio SDK for getting the sounds into your experience. If you have any questions, we'll be in the pavilion outside, and thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you.